In version 3.8.04 of Wish, we've introduced a brand new tool. It's for people running Wish in the SQL database, and it's a new way to get data and statistics and lists and all that stuff out. It's basically the building and running of SQL queries. The function is available to the admin user on the admin functions menu, and it's just down here at the bottom. When you open it up, you'll get a screen like this. On the screen, you can build SQL queries. Now, SQL queries are fairly complex, but you can find out about building SQL queries as there's a lot of resources available on the internet. Now, one of the things you can do if you want to build simple queries or start very simply, you can use the built-in wizard. And the wizard shows a list of all of your files in this table here on the right-hand side. So for example, if I want a list of all of the crisis calls in a certain time period, I can use this. So I can click on the plus sign beside crisis, and I can do things like picking the date, picking the duration, and if I wanted other items on here, I could. For example, if I wanted to know if anybody indicated pets are involved, I could do something like that. When I'm done picking the fields, I can use this button at the top to paste the select statement, and it will build the query for you. Very simply then, you can run that by clicking this Run button. And this gives you a list of everything that you had asked for in the query. Let's go back to the Select Statement tab. Now I could save this statement, and I could give it a code and a description, and then I can recall it to the screen at any time in the future. So for example, if I wanted to call this, and make sure you give it a good description. Once you've saved your query, you can call it to the screen at any time now. You see it's a valid choice on this list. When you have your query saved, you can also make modifications to it, which is useful if you're comfortable with SQL. For example, if I wanted to put a date selection range in there, in SQL, you can do where statements. So I can say where. Basically, when you add a statement like that, what it does is it will only show me the calls that were between January 1st, 2017 and December 31st, 2017. And now when I run the query, my lists are only showing calls between that date range. And I can sort the list now by clicking on these columns. I can sort it up and down this way as appropriate. Furthermore, when you have results, you can export the results to one of three different file types: XML, which is a common way to transfer data, as is CSV for comma separated value. If you're more comfortable with Microsoft Excel, you can export it out directly as an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, back to the select statement. Now, often when you want to do things like this, if you are reusing this query a lot of times, maybe you don't want the date to be hard-coded in here. So what happens is I can replace these selection criteria with tokens, and the tokens are listed below. So for example, you'll see that my dates from and my dates to have a token in there. So if I change that to the tokens, which are, that's a tilde, it's a little squiggly line, capital D1. The token for the date 2 is capital D2. Now, what that means is whenever I run this query, it will pull the dates from whatever is entered down here. So for example, if I want to go back and have a different date range, maybe 2014 to today, you'll see that I've got a totally different set of results. And you can save that query like that. One of the other things that you might want to do is if you want anybody other than admin to be able to run it, you can actually check this box here. If you allow non-admin users to run a query and save that, that becomes available to any user if they go up to the reports and down here to run SQL queries. One other topic we can talk about is building queries that you can use in formulas. So consider this for a moment. If I go to my formula builder, I created a section of statistics for internal stats. And I want to track the number of VAW calls. So I use this formula to give me a count of all of the calls received on the crisis line where we coded it as VAW, VAW2, VAWF, or VAWS. And it adds this up. This is a traditional way that this formula has done. Now, you can actually do the exact same formula in SQL. So if for some reason you chose to do that, you would reference an SQL query that we built. So notice I'm referencing an SQL query called VAW crisis calls, and VAW crisis calls is a query that looks like this. You notice if you've got a query that is able to be used in formulas, you get a little checkbox on this button here. The key about whether or not you're able to use a query in a formula is contained in the administrator's manual. But essentially, it's important that this first part is either select count, select average, or select sum. You'll find more information on that in the user's manual. As well, you must have the two date tokens in the formula just like that. If you've got those two things, you will qualify to be able to use them in formulas. The query, you'll notice if I actually run this query, what it does, it doesn't give a list, it just gives a single line result, and it's just over here. So this gave me a count of 3,628 for the date range of August 3rd, 2014 to August 29th, 2020. So when you have an SQL query built like that, you can use it in a formula for your statistics. So the big question is, why would I bother doing that if it's already there? So I've actually showed you that this line and the other formula right here, they look different, but they give the same results. If I were to print my statistics report, and just go down to that page, what you'll notice is that the numbers here between those two formulas are identical. Okay, so back to this. So the reason you might want to do SQL formulas is really there's no limit to the number of things you can actually ask to report. So consider that same formula that we just had where we were asking for the number of VAW calls. So imagine I wanted to build a new formula. I'll just call it 03. I'll put it in my internal section. So maybe I want a formula that will tell me the number of VAW calls that I had that lasted less than 5 minutes. So the only way that you can do this in Wish is with an SQL query. So you may have 100 different requirements like this, but this is just one example. So what happens in my SQL query setup, where I have this query here, I just make a slight adjustment to it. And what I've done, I've actually created it already in here. I created a new query called VAW calls LT5min, which means less than 5 minutes. It's the exact same query, except I just put an additional parameter in here to tell me only report if the duration is less than 5 minutes. And now when I run this query, you'll see out of that large number, I have 115 in that particular date range that I requested that were less than 5 minutes. So when I have an SQL query that qualifies for use in formulas, now I can use that query inside of a formula. So here's the formula I started. So now I can pick on my drop-down list I want to report using an SQL query, and I can pick that particular query here and insert it into the formula, just like that. Now, when I report my statistics, you'll see in this month of March, for example, I had 89 calls, and 4 of them were less than 5 minutes. So that's a quick summary of how you can use the new function found on the Functions menu, create and run SQL queries.